What happens when the ruler of the immortal underworld walks into a Michelin star restaurant to celebrate his new engagement, completely blind to the fact that the exhausted, heavily pregnant waitress serving his champagne is the wife he thought died a year ago? Bloodlines will be tested, dark secrets will unravel, and a single drop of spilled wine will awaken a dormant obsession. Welcome to a tale of betrayal, hidden heirs, an insatiable hunger. You won't want to look away. Friday nights at Liqueur, Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment, were a grueling symphony of clinking, crystal-hushed negotiations and the suffocating scent of exorbitant wealth. For Clara Bennett, it was merely another shift in a seemingly endless string of agonizing nights. Clara leaned heavily against the cold stainless steel prep counter in the kitchen, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The oppressive heat of the industrial ovens radiated against her back, but it was nothing compared to the fiery ache radiating from her swollen ankles and lower spine. At 7 months pregnant, Clara was carrying a profound burden. Her body, once slender and adorned in the finest silks money and immortal power could buy, had transformed entirely. To accommodate the demanding, unnatural growth of the half-vampire child nestled deep within her womb, her metabolism had aggressively shifted. She had gained a massive amount of weight, her frame broadening, her face rounding out with soft, heavy cheeks. Her thick thighs chafed painfully against the coarse fabric of her cheap black uniform, and the apron strings dug into the deep folds of her waist, barely able to secure themselves around her immense belly. She was fat, exhausted, and completely unrecognizable from the delicate woman she had been just 1 year prior. "Table 4 needs their amuse-bouche, Clara, move it," barked Mr. Harrison, the restaurant's red-faced, perpetually enraged general manager. He slapped a silver ticket onto the metal counter, his eyes darting over Clara's heavy, sweating form with barely concealed disdain. "And for God's sake, wipe your forehead. You look like you just ran a marathon in a sauna. We cater to the elite, not the desperate." "Yes, Mr. Harrison," Clara murmured, her voice a soft, raspy whisper. She swiped a rough paper towel across her brow, leaving a streak of flour across her flushed skin. She turned to her co-worker, a frantic college student named Chloe, who was furiously plating microgreens with a pair of tweezers. "Chloe, please," Clara begged, her voice trembling slightly. "Can you take table 4? My back is killing me, and the baby is pressing right against my sciatic nerve." Chloe shot her a sympathetic but panicked look. "I can't, Clara. Harrison already warned me about swapping sections. Besides, the reservation for table 4 just walked in, and they requested absolute privacy. The guy looks like he owns the city, and the woman with him is wearing a necklace that probably costs more than my entire tuition. Just push through, okay? 2 more hours." Clara swallowed the lump of dread forming in her throat. She picked up the heavy silver tray, balancing the delicate porcelain spoons containing the chef's complimentary appetizers. Every step she took toward the swinging double doors of the dining room was a monumental effort. Her heavy breasts ached, her swollen feet pulsed with every heartbeat, and the child inside her, a creature of darkness and immense power, stirred restlessly, as if sensing a shift in the atmosphere. As Clara pushed her broad shoulder through the kitchen doors, the chaotic noise of the culinary workspace vanished, replaced by the velvety, muted hum of the dining room. Soft jazz played from concealed speakers. The lighting was impossibly dim, casting long, romantic shadows across the plush velvet booths. Clara began to navigate the narrow aisles, her large body awkwardly brushing against the backs of empty chairs. She kept her head down, a practiced maneuver to avoid the judgmental stares of the wealthy patrons. But as she approached the secluded alcove of table 4, the temperature in the room plummeted. It wasn't an air conditioning draft. It was a bone-chilling, unnatural frost that made the tiny hairs on the back of Clara's neck stand at attention. It was a cold she knew intimately. It was the chill of the grave wrapped in cashmere and power. She stopped dead in her tracks, her heart slammed against her ribs with the force of a battering ram. Sitting in the dim light of the alcove, illuminated only by a single flickering candle, was Alistair Montgomery, the vampire king of the eastern seaboard, the ruthless billionaire. The man who had possessed her, claimed her, and ultimately driven her to fake her own fiery death to escape his suffocating, controlling darkness. He looked exactly as she remembered, perhaps even more terrifyingly handsome. His sharp, aristocratic jawline was set in a firm line. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his pale, flawless skin caught the candlelight, making him look like a predatory statue carved from marble. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that clung to his broad shoulders, radiating an aura of lethal authority. Humans in the restaurant were subconsciously leaning away from his table, their primal instincts warning them of an apex predator in their midst. Clara's lungs seized. Her vision blurred the edges of the room, turning dark. "He can't be here. He doesn't eat human food. Vampires abhor these places," her mind screamed. But then Clara saw the reason for his presence. Sitting across from the king was Beatrice Sinclair. Beatrice, the daughter of a rival vampire lord, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her notorious cruelty. She was a vision of immortal elegance, draped in a backless crimson gown, her raven hair cascading over her shoulders like spun silk. Beatrice was laughing a high musical sound that grated against Clara's ears. She reached across the table, her long, manicured fingers resting intimately over Alistair's pale hand. They were celebrating. Clara's hands began to shake violently. The silver spoons on her tray clattered against one another. She had risked everything to flee Alistair's oppressive fortress. She had burned her old life to the ground, enduring agonizing poverty, the intense physical pain of this unnatural pregnancy, and the complete loss of her identity, all to protect the child growing inside her from being raised in a world of blood and terror. And now the father of her unborn child was sitting mere feet away, preparing to wed another. "Waitress!" Beatrice's sharp, haughty voice cut through the air, snapping Clara out of her paralyzed trance. The immortal woman was waving a hand impatiently. "Are we expected to forage for our own water?" Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Clara's veins. She had to run. She had to turn around, drop the tray, and flee out the back alley door. But if she ran, the sudden movement would draw Alistair's predatory gaze. With his supernatural speed, he would catch her before she made it 3 steps. Her only defense was her disguise. The fact that she was 70 pounds heavier, wearing an ugly uniform, heavily pregnant, and devoid of the expensive perfumes and glamour she used to wear. She looked like a tired, fat human woman. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Clara lowered her head, letting her unkempt, frizzy hair fall like a curtain over her face. She willed her violently trembling legs to move forward. She would serve them, remain utterly invisible, and survive the night. The distance from the center aisle to table 4 felt like miles. Clara's thick, swollen legs carried her forward with heavy, agonizing slowness. Every time the heavy soles of her orthotic shoes hit the polished hardwood floor, she felt a phantom echo of Alistair's heavy footsteps pacing the halls of his estate, a sound that used to haunt her nightmares. As she neared the alcove, the ambient scent of roasted garlic and red wine was entirely overpowered by the intoxicating sharp fragrance of winter frost bergamot and raw power. Alistair's signature scent. It hit Clara's sensitive pregnant nose like a physical blow, causing the baby inside her to give a sudden violent lurch. Clara bit the inside of her cheek to stifle a gasp, tasting the coppery tang of her own blood. She approached the side of the table, her head bowed so low her chin rested against the collar of her tight uniform. "Good evening," Clara rasped, forcing her vocal cords to tightest, lowering the pitch of her voice to hide its natural soft melody. "Compliments of the chef." She slowly, painstakingly lowered her heavy arms to place the silver spoons on the crisp white linen. Her thick fingers were trembling so badly she nearly dropped the porcelain. Beatrice leaned back, a look of profound disgust crossing her flawless features. "What is this pureed peas and foam? Take it away. We didn't come here to consume garden weeds." "Beatrice?" Alistair's voice resonated through the space. The sound of his deep, commanding baritone sent a shockwave of electricity straight down Clara's spine. Her breath hitched. It was the voice that had whispered dark promises in the dead of night, the voice that had commanded empires. "We are keeping up appearances," Alistair continued, his tone dangerously smooth and devoid of any real warmth. "Leave the appetizers, waitress, and bring a bottle of the 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild. Unopened." Unopened. Clara knew what that meant. He intended to compel the staff later to ignore the fact that the wine remained untouched, or perhaps Beatrice planned to slip her own additives into the glass. "Right away, sir," Clara mumbled, her eyes fixed firmly on the expensive leather of Alistair's shoes. She turned to leave her massive belly shifting awkwardly, causing her apron strings to dig painfully into her sides. But as she rotated, the heavy fabric of her uniform brushed against the edge of the table. It was a minuscule error, a lapse in coordination caused by exhaustion and terror. But in the world of immortals, minor errors were magnified. The silver tray in Clara's hands clipped the edge of Beatrice's empty crystal water goblet. The glass tipped, wobbled precariously for half a second, and then plummeted. Clara gasped, dropping the tray to try and catch it, but her reflexes were too slow, hindered by her immense size and the heavy weight in her front. The goblet shattered against the hardwood floor with a deafening crack, sending shards of thick crystal and a spray of leftover ice water directly onto the hem of Beatrice's crimson gown. "You clumsy, fat idiot!" Beatrice shrieked instantly, jumping up from the booth. Her eyes flashed a dangerous, unnatural shade of amber for a fraction of a second, before settling back to their human brown disguise. She brushed frantically at her ruined dress. "Do you have any idea how much this silk costs? It's ruined. You vile, lumbering creature. The dining room fell dead silent. Every eye turned toward the alcove. Mr. Harrison was already sprinting across the floor from the host stand, his face purple with rage. But Clara didn't see Harrison, because the moment the glass shattered, Alistair Montgomery had moved. With a speed that defied human comprehension, Alistair was suddenly standing. He reached out to pull Beatrice back from the broken glass, but as he did, his large, ice-cold hand accidentally clamped around Clara's thick, bare wrist to steady her as she stumbled backward. The contact was like a lightning strike. Alistair froze. His grip on Clara's wrist was like a steel vice, immobilizing her completely. Clara's heart stopped. She stood frozen, a heavy, terrified statue, trapped in the grasp of the monster she had sacrificed everything to escape. Alistair didn't look at her face. He was staring down at the hand holding her wrist. He could feel the rapid, terrified thumping of her pulse beneath his fingers. But it wasn't just her pulse. Alistair's nostrils flared. His chest expanded as he drew in a deep, slow breath of the air surrounding them. Vampires saw the world through scent as much as sight. When Clara had faked her death, she had left behind a burnt corpse, covered in her blood, enough to fool the king who believed his fragile human wife had perished in a tragic accident. Since then, her scent had been masked by the pungent grease of the diner, the stale smell of cheap apartments, the overwhelming hormonal changes of pregnancy, and the sheer volume of her altered physical state. But here now, with his skin pressed directly against her sweat-dampened wrist, the disguise began to fracture. He smelled the cheap polyester, the sweat, the flour, the overwhelming, cloying scent of a human heavily pregnant with life. He smelled the anxiety and the fear. He looked at her heavily swollen fat body, her wide waist, her thick arms. The physical evidence told him this was merely a clumsy, unfortunate mortal. But beneath it all, buried deep beneath the layers of grease and hormones, there was an echo, a whisper of rain on cobblestones, of sweet honeysuckle, and something far more terrifying. He smelled his own bloodline. The half-vampire child inside Clara, agitated by the proximity of its father, kicked violently. The movement was visible beneath Clara's apron, a sharp, unnatural jut against the fabric. Alistair's eyes, previously bored and detached, snapped up to lock onto Clara's face. The heavy curtain of her frizzy hair parted slightly as she gasped from the pain of the kick. Time stopped. Clara stared into the bottomless, terrifying crimson depths of Alistair Montgomery's eyes. She saw the exact moment the veil of ignorance lifted. She saw the confusion twist into disbelief and then slowly morph into a horrifying, earth-shattering realization. "Clara," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the ringing in Clara's ears, yet it carried the weight of a collapsing star. "What is the meaning of this?" Mr. Harrison arrived, breathless and furious, grabbing Clara by the shoulder. "I am so sorry, Mr. Montgomery, Miss Sinclair. This woman is fired immediately. Clara, get your massive self back to the kitchen and pack your things." But Alistair didn't blink. He didn't look at the manager. His grip on Clara's wrist tightened, not enough to break the bone, but enough to ensure she could never ever slip away again. His gaze slowly dropped from her terrified eyes down to the immense swollen mound of her belly and back up again. A low vibrating growl began to rumble in Alistair's chest, a sound so primal and terrifying that Mr. Harrison instantly stopped speaking and took a trembling step back. "She is going nowhere," Alistair stated, his voice a lethal, silken threat that promised unimaginable violence. He stepped closer to Clara, invading her space, his towering frame casting a dark shadow over her heavy body. "Because this waitress is coming with me." Beatrice Sinclair's jaw dropped in sheer, unadulterated outrage. The crystal shards at her feet were entirely forgotten as she stared at the man she was supposed to marry in less than a month. The immortal heiress, accustomed to absolute deference and terrified obedience, stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hands curling into tight fists. "Alistair, what are you doing?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill and echoing off the vaulted ceilings of Liqueur. "You are causing a scene over a clumsy, overweight mortal. Let her go and demand Harrison bring us a towel." Alistair Montgomery did not spare his fiancée a single glance. His crimson gaze remained locked onto Clara's terrified round face. His thumb slowly stroked the frantic pulse point at Clara's thick wrist, feeling the undeniable erratic heartbeat of the woman he had buried a year ago, alongside the powerful thumping rhythm of the unborn creature sharing her life force. "The engagement is terminated," Beatrice, Alistair said. His voice was not a shout. It was a deadly quiet murmur that nonetheless carried to every corner of the silent dining room. Beatrice gasped, stepping back as if she had been physically struck. "Excuse me, you cannot simply cancel our alliance. Your father will do nothing," Alistair interrupted, his tone chillingly absolute. "Thomas, From the shadows near the restaurant's entrance, a tall, imposing man in a pristine chauffeur's uniform stepped forward. Thomas Wright had served the Montgomery bloodline for over a century. He moved with supernatural swiftness, parting the crowd of stunned, wealthy human onlookers. "Yes, my king," Thomas murmured, bowing his head. "Clear the tab! Handle the manager!" Alistair commanded. Then, without another word of explanation, to the furious Beatrice or the trembling Mr. Harrison, Alistair shifted his grip. "No, please!" Clara whimpered, her voice cracking as true panic set in. She tried to plant her heavy orthotic shoes into the polished floorboard, attempting to use her massive pregnant weight as an anchor. "Alistair, don't do this. I'm just a waitress. You're mistaken." "Do not insult my intelligence, Clara," Alistair growled, leaning in so close that his icy breath fanned her flushed, sweaty cheek. "Your scent is buried beneath a mountain of grease, desperation, and human fat, but you are mine. You have always been mine." Before Clara could utter another protest, Alistair wrapped his arms around her broad, thick waist and lifted her effortlessly off the ground. Clara gasped in shock. She had gained over 70 pounds. Her body was heavy, unwieldy, and swollen with fluid and a half-vampire child. Yet to the immortal king she weighed no more than a feather. She kicked her thick legs in protest, her heavy breasts heaving as she struggled against his iron-clad chest. But it was entirely useless. Alistair marched out of the restaurant, ignoring the flashing cell phone cameras of the elite patrons who were secretly recording the bizarre spectacle. He carried Clara through the ornate brass doors and out into the biting chill of the Manhattan night. The damp city air hit Clara's face, mixing with her sweat and tears. A sleek black armored Rolls-Royce idled at the curb. Alistair wrenched the rear door open and deposited Clara onto the plush leather seats before sliding in right beside her, trapping her against the far door. "Drive!" Alistair commanded as Thomas slid into the driver's seat. The heavy doors locked with a resounding click that sounded exactly like a prison cell slamming shut. The privacy partition rolled up, sealing Clara in the soundproof back cabin with her worst nightmare. Clara huddled against the door, her thick arms wrapping protectively over her immense protruding belly. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving, as she struggled to pull oxygen into her compressed lungs. Alistair simply sat there staring at her. The streetlights from Fifth Avenue flickered through the tinted windows, illuminating the stark contrast between them. He was a vision of bespoke perfection, untouched by time or hardship. Clara was a sweaty, unkempt mess. Her cheap uniform was stained with flour and food grease. Her face, once sharply contoured and delicate, was now round, heavy, and pale with terror. "A burned corpse in our master bedroom," Alistair began, his voice dangerously soft. "Teeth pulled to match your dental records. A devastating fire that reduced the entire east wing of my estate to ashes. Tell me, Clara, how did you manage to fool the investigators?" "I didn't want this life," Clara sobbed, burying her face in her plump hands. "I couldn't let my baby grow up in a world of blood and corpses. I paid a morgue attendant. I traded the diamond necklace you gave me for a fresh Jane Doe." Alistair's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering furiously under his pale skin. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them. He reached out his cold fingers, brushing against her heavy, swollen cheek. Clara flinched violently. "You faked your death. You subjected me to a year of mourning." Alistair hissed, his eyes flashing a vibrant predatory red. "You hid my heir in the slums of this city, reducing yourself to a fat, overworked servant just to escape me." "I am not a servant," Clara yelled, a sudden burst of maternal defiance breaking through her fear. She slapped his hand away. "I am a mother trying to protect her child from a monster." Instead of striking her, Alistair's gaze dropped to her massive belly. He reached out again, ignoring her attempts to bat him away, and placed his large palm directly over the straining fabric of her apron. The moment his skin made contact with the swell of her stomach, the baby stopped kicking. A profound, terrifying stillness settled over the child, recognizing the dark, dominant magic of its sire. "You have altered your body beyond recognition," Alistair whispered, his tone shifting from anger to a twisted, dark awe. He felt the immense width of her waist, the solid, heavy mass she had become to sustain his offspring. "You destroyed your beauty, abandoned your luxury, and carried my bloodline in secret. You think this makes me repulsed, Clara. You think gaining this weight and hiding in the dirt changes what you are to me." Clara stared at him, tears spilling over her thick eyelashes. "It only proves," Alistair said, a dark, obsessive smile curling his lips, "how desperate you are, and how completely, utterly I will have to break you to ensure you never run again." The armored Rolls-Royce glided into the subterranean parking garage of the Montgomery Tower, a monolithic skyscraper that dominated the Manhattan skyline. Clara felt a fresh wave of nausea roll through her heavy body. She knew this building. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors, an impenetrable fortress of reinforced glass steel and immortal security. When the car stopped, Thomas opened the door. Clara tried to scramble out on her own, determined not to be carried like a helpless infant again. She planted her swollen feet onto the concrete and pushed herself up, her thick thighs trembling under her massive weight. She swayed dangerously, a wave of dizzying fatigue hitting her. Alistair was there in a microsecond, his arm wrapping securely around her broad back, steadying her. "Do not push yourself. The child is draining your human reserves," he commanded. "Don't touch me," Clara spat, though she was entirely reliant on his strength to stay upright. He ignored her, guiding her forcibly toward the private elevator. The doors slid shut, and the high-speed ascent made Clara's ears pop further, disorienting her. When the doors opened, she was thrust back into a world of sickening opulence. Dark mahogany floors, priceless antiquities, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. "Mrs. Whitman!" Alistair's voice boomed through the massive penthouse. A smartly dressed, older human woman scurried out from the adjoining corridor. The housekeeper froze when she saw Clara. Recognition dawned slowly as Mrs. Whitman's eyes swept over Clara's frizzy hair, her rounded, heavy face, and the enormous, straining belly hidden beneath the cheap diner uniform. "Madam Clara!" Mrs. Whitman gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "But we buried you!" "Prepare the master suite," Alistair ordered, completely dismissing the housekeeper's shock. "And contact Dr. Jonathan Hayes immediately. Tell him I require his presence at the penthouse, now." "Alistair, I don't need a doctor," Clara protested, gripping the back of a velvet armchair to support her aching spine. "I just need to go home. My shift, my landlord. Your miserable existence in whatever rat-infested apartment you reside in is over," Alistair stated, shrugging off his suit jacket. "You are never setting foot outside this penthouse again. Without my explicit permission. You belong to me. The creature inside you belongs to me." Within 20 minutes, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse opened to admit Dr. Jonathan Hayes. He was a rare breed, a human physician fully aware of the immortal world, heavily compensated to provide discreet medical care to the supernatural elite. He carried a sleek black medical bag and wore an expression of perpetual weary professionalism. "Mr. Montgomery," Dr. Hayes said, bowing slightly, "you said it was an emergency regarding an heir." Alistair pointed to the plush leather sofa where Clara was slumped, exhausted and defeated. "Examine her. She has been surviving on human scraps and working manual labor. Ensure the child is unharmed." Dr. Hayes approached cautiously. He recognized Clara, having treated her for minor human ailments during her marriage, but the physical transformation was staggering. He gently asked Clara to lie back against the cushions and requested she lift her apron and shirt to expose her belly. Reluctantly, tears streaming down her face, Clara pushed the cheap fabric up, revealing her swollen, heavily stretched stomach. Dark purple stretch marks crisscrossed her pale skin, a testament to the aggressive, unnatural growth of the vampire fetus. Dr. Hayes unpacked a portable ultrasound machine, applying a thick layer of cold gel to Clara's stomach. The machine hummed to life, and the screen illuminated with grainy black and white shapes. The doctor's eyes widened. "Fascinating," he murmured, moving the wand over Clara's thick flesh. "The fetus is exceptionally large, Mr. Montgomery. It is drawing heavily on her calcium and iron reserves. The weight gain Clara has experienced." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Is her body's desperate evolutionary response to keep herself from being cannibalized from the inside out." Alistair stepped closer, his eyes locked onto the screen, watching the fluttering heartbeat of his unborn child. "Explain. Vampire offspring require immense energy," Dr. Hayes continued, wiping the gel off Clara's skin with a towel. "If she had remained thin, the baby would have drained her to the point of heart failure months ago. By increasing her caloric intake and fat reserves, she essentially built a buffer. She saved both their lives. However, her blood pressure is dangerously high, and her joints are buckling under the massive strain. She requires immediate bed rest and a specialized diet infused with specific supplements." Clara knew what specific supplements meant. "Blood." "I won't drink it," Clara rasped, pulling her ugly uniform shirt back down over her heavy waist. "I survived 7 months on mortal food. I won't let you turn my baby into a bloodthirsty parasite before it's even born." "You will do exactly as I command," Alistair said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that sent shivers down Clara's spine. Dr. Hayes packed his equipment quickly, sensing the volatile, violent energy radiating from the Vampire King. "I will have the dietary plan sent up within the hour, sir. She must rest." Once the doctor was gone, the silence in the penthouse was suffocating. Clara struggled to sit up, her thick legs dangling over the edge of the sofa. She looked at Alistair, expecting to see disgust in his eyes. She was fat. She was ruined. She was no longer the delicate trophy wife he used to parade in front of his immortal rivals. But as Alistair slowly knelt in front of her, placing his hands on her heavy, dimpled knees, there was no disgust. "You hate me," Clara whispered, fresh tears falling. "You brought me here to punish me." Alistair looked up, his crimson eyes burning with a dark, twisted devotion. "Punish you, Clara. You have given me the greatest gift imaginable. You endured the destruction of your own vanity to protect my bloodline." He leaned forward, pressing his cold, immortal lips against the rough, cheap fabric covering her swollen belly. "You are not going to be punished," Alistair murmured against her skin. "You are going to be worshipped, and you are never ever going to leave me again." Morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Park Avenue penthouse, casting long, golden geometric shapes across the expansive bedroom. Sunlight was heavily UV filtered, an expensive architectural necessity for a vampire's residence, but it still felt jarringly bright to Clara. For 7 months she had lived in a basement apartment owned by a sleazy landlord named Walter Brooks, where the only light came from a single grimy window near the ceiling. Now she lay trapped in a king-sized bed draped in $1,000 fretter linens. The mattress was a cloud, yet her body felt like lead. Clara tried to shift her immense weight, groaning, as a sharp pain shot up her lower back. Her heavy, round face was deeply flushed, and the thick flesh of her arms felt tender and swollen. The sheer mass she had gained to protect the immortal child inside her made every movement a Herculean task. The heavy mahogany door clicked open, and Mrs. Whitman entered carrying an ornate silver tray. The human housekeeper kept her eyes respectfully averted from Clara's disheveled, bloated form. "Good morning, madam," Mrs. Whitman said gently, setting the tray on the nightstand. "Mr. Montgomery had to attend an emergency council meeting regarding the sudden cancellation of his upcoming nuptials. He left strict instructions that you are to consume this entirely." Clara looked at the tray. Sitting in the center was a tall crystal glass, filled with a thick, dark, crimson smoothie. The scent hit her instantly. It was mixed with rich berries and iron-heavy spinach, but beneath the fruity mask was the undeniable metallic tang of human blood. A wave of profound nausea rolled through Clara's heavy body. "I can't drink that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am a human being, Mrs. Whitman. I am not a monster." "Madam, please," the housekeeper urged, her voice tight with genuine fear. "Dr. Hayes was very clear. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. Mount Sinai Hospital's maternity ward wouldn't even know how to handle the sheer caloric drain this child is putting on your mortal heart. You're carrying a king's heir. If you don't feed it what it needs, it will continue to drain your fat and muscle until your organs shut down." As if validating the housekeeper's warning, the baby delivered a vicious, agonizing kick to Clara's ribs. Clara gasped, her thick hands instinctively clutching her massive, straining belly. The pain was blinding. Tears pooling in her eyes, Clara reached out with a trembling, thick arm and grasped the crystal glass. She brought it to her lips, closed her eyes tightly, and drank. The liquid was cold, rich, and terrifyingly satisfying to the dark entity growing in her womb. Almost immediately, the frantic, painful kicking subsided, replaced by a warm, heavy lethargy in her midsection. She hated herself for the relief it brought. She had become a vessel, a bloated, captive incubator. Meanwhile, miles away in a subterranean boardroom beneath Wall Street, Alistair Montgomery was systematically dismantling the Sinclair family's empire. The fallout from the severed engagement was catastrophic. Beatrice's father, Lord Sinclair, had threatened open warfare, but Alistair was the apex predator of the eastern seaboard. By noon, Alistair had frozen their shell company assets and ordered his enforcers to barricade the Sinclair shipping routes. But Alistair had underestimated the sheer venomous spite of a scorned immortal woman. Beatrice Sinclair did not care about shipping routes or offshore bank accounts. She cared about humiliation. The image of Alistair dropping her for a fat, sweating, pathetic human waitress was burning a hole in her fractured sanity. Using a proxy human shell corporation, Beatrice had managed to trace Clara's recent past. She found Walter Brooks, Clara's former slumlord, and paid him an exorbitant sum of cash to hand over the spare keys and any information regarding the fat girl from apartment 1B. Finding out Clara was heavily pregnant with Alistair's child, ignited a homicidal rage in Beatrice that no immortal law could contain. Back at the penthouse, the afternoon stretched into a suffocating silence. Clara had managed to haul her heavy body out of bed dressing in a plush, oversized cashmere robe Alistair had ordered for her. It barely closed over her massive stomach, the tie resting awkwardly beneath her heavy breasts. She waddled slowly toward the living room, seeking the comfort of the television to drown out her racing thoughts. The security at the penthouse was supposed to be impenetrable. Biometric locks, reinforced steel doors, and a team of highly trained human mercenaries. But immortals possessed a power called glamour, the ability to twist human perception and command weak minds. Captain Miller, the head of Alistair's daytime security, was a decorated veteran, but he was still only mortal. When Beatrice Sinclair stepped out of the private elevator, her eyes glowing a hypnotic radioactive amber, Miller's mind went blank. He stood frozen, his hand falling away from his holstered weapon, completely subjugated by her dark will. "Unlock the primary residence," Beatrice purred, her voice dripping with lethal intent. Miller silently punched the passcode into the keypad. The heavy steel core door clicked open. Beatrice stepped into the penthouse, her stilettos sinking into the Persian rugs. She wore a sleek, tailored white suit, looking like an angel of death. She moved silently through the grand foyer, following the heavy, unmistakable scent of human fear and the pulsing, rhythmic heartbeat of an unborn vampire. Clara was standing by the bookshelf when she felt the unnatural plunge in room temperature. The hairs on her thick arms stood up. She turned clumsily, her wide body throwing her off balance, and gasped. Beatrice stood in the archway, a cruel, mocking smile twisting her flawless face. "Well, well," Beatrice sneered, her eyes raking over Clara's broad, heavy frame, lingering with intense disgust on the massive bulge of her stomach. "Alistair always did have a penchant for rescuing stray dogs, but I must admit I never expected him to breed a farm animal." Panic, cold and absolute, seized Clara's chest. She stumbled backward, her heavy, orthotic shoes dragging against the hardwood floor. She instinctively wrapped her thick, fleshy arms around her enormous belly, turning her body sideways in a desperate attempt to shield the child from the immortal predator. "How did you get in here?" Clara demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, though it wavered pitifully. "Alistair's guards are currently staring at the ceiling, drooling like the pathetic mortals they are," Beatrice interrupted, taking a slow, measured step into the room. She unbuttoned her white suit jacket, her amber eyes burning with a psychotic intensity. "Did you really think you could humiliate me, Clara? Did you honestly believe that getting knocked up and hiding under a mountain of blubber would save you?" "I didn't want any of this," Clara pleaded, backing up until her broad back hit the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. There was nowhere left to run. "I left him. I left this world so my baby wouldn't become a monster like you." Beatrice laughed, a high, sharp sound that felt like shattered glass. "Oh, you stupid fat cow. The child inside you is already a monster. It's draining you. Look at yourself. You are grotesque. You've ruined your body, ballooned into this repulsive creature, all to harbor a parasite." Beatrice closed the distance between them with terrifying supernatural speed. 1 second she was across the room, and the next, her icy, vice-like fingers were wrapped around Clara's thick throat. Clara choked her heavy cheeks, flushing dark red, as her airway was instantly restricted. She grabbed Beatrice's wrists with her own large hands, trying to pry the immortal's fingers away, but it was like trying to bend solid titanium. "Alistair broke our treaty for this," Beatrice hissed, leaning in so close that Clara could smell the copper scent of old blood on her breath. "He disgraced my family for a sweating, bloated mortal. If I rip that bastard child from your womb right now, he will have nothing left to protect." Beatrice raised her free hand, her manicured nails elongated, transforming into sharp, jagged, bone-white talons. She aimed her hand directly at the straining fabric covering Clara's massive stomach. A primal, explosive, maternal rage ignited within Clara. The fear vanished, replaced by an animalistic drive to survive. Clara wasn't the delicate, fragile waif she used to be. She had gained 70 pounds of sheer mass. She was heavy, solid, and fighting for 2 lives. Instead of trying to pull away from Beatrice's grip, Clara threw her entire massive body weight forward. The sudden sheer kinetic force of a heavy pregnant woman lunging directly at her caught Beatrice completely off guard. The immortal was light, relying on speed and grace, not raw, uncoordinated bulk. Clara's thick shoulder slammed squarely into Beatrice's chest. Beatrice lost her footing, her stilettos snapping under the awkward angle. She released Clara's throat with a gasp of surprise, tumbling backward onto the Persian rug. Clara gasped for air, coughing violently. "Secure security!" she screamed with all her might. "Help me!" Beatrice snarled, her beautiful face twisting into a demonic mask. She scrambled up, her talons fully extended, prepared to tear Clara's throat out. But before Beatrice could take a single step, a wave of dark, concussive energy erupted from Clara's abdomen. It wasn't Clara's doing. It was the child. The unborn heir, sensing the immediate lethal threat to its mother and its own existence, tapped into its ancient bloodline. A shockwave of pure telekinetic force blasted outward, invisible but devastatingly powerful. The force hit Beatrice like a freight train. The immortal woman was lifted entirely off her feet and hurled backward through the air. She smashed violently into the heavy mahogany bookshelf, shattering the thick wood and sending hundreds of leather-bound books raining down upon her. Clara fell to her thick knees, her massive belly resting heavily on her thighs, panting and clutching her stomach in shock. The baby was perfectly still, exhausted by the massive expenditure of energy. The heavy steel doors of the penthouse burst open with a deafening crash, ripped entirely off their reinforced hinges. Alistair Montgomery stood in the wreckage of the doorway. His bespoke suit ruined his eyes, burning a blinding luminescent crimson. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly, a physical manifestation of his apocalyptic fury. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second: the subjugated guards in the hall, the ruined bookshelf, Beatrice bleeding on the floor, and Clara, his heavy, beautiful, terrified Clara, cowering on the ground, clutching their child. "Alistair!" Beatrice coughed, spitting up a mouthful of dark blood as she tried to drag herself out of the splintered wood. "She attacked me, the fat human!" Alistair crossed the room in a blur of shadow. He did not speak. He did not demand an explanation. He simply grabbed Beatrice by the throat and lifted her high into the air, his grip so brutally tight that the immortal woman's cervical spine began to crack audibly. "You dared to enter my home!" Alistair's voice was a terrifying, inhuman vibration that rattled the glass windows of the penthouse. "You dared to touch the mother of my child! She is nothing!" Beatrice choked out her legs, kicking uselessly in the air. "She is a queen!" Alistair roared, his fangs fully descended. "And you are a corpse!" With a sickening, wet crack, Alistair snapped Beatrice's neck, severing the spinal cord completely. He tossed her paralyzed, twitching body to the floor like a piece of discarded garbage. She wasn't dead. Immortals were difficult to kill, but she was broken, powerless, and completely at his mercy. "Thomas!" Alistair bellowed. The chauffeur materialized in the doorway, his expression grim. "Drag this piece of filth to the incinerator in the sub-basement," Alistair commanded, not even looking at Beatrice's body. "Burn her! Slowly!" As Thomas hauled the paralyzed heiress away, Alistair immediately dropped to his knees in front of Clara. The terrifying, monstrous aura vanished instantly, replaced by a frantic, desperate panic. He reached out with trembling hands, gently cupping Clara's round, flushed face. "Clara, my love," Alistair breathed, his cold thumbs wiping away the tears streaming down her plump cheeks. He scanned her neck, seeing the angry red bruises forming where Beatrice had choked her. "Did she harm you? Did she harm the baby?" "No," Clara sobbed, leaning into his cold touch despite herself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted and in immense pain. "The baby, it protected us. It pushed her away." Alistair looked down at her massive, straining belly, an expression of profound dark awe washing over his aristocratic features. He wrapped his strong arms around her broad waist, burying his face against the curve of her heavy neck. "You are safe," Alistair whispered, his voice thick with an obsessive, unbroken devotion. "I swear on my immortal soul, Clara, you will never have to fight again. You are mine to protect forever." The adrenaline that had fueled Clara's desperate defense against the immortal assassin abruptly vanished, leaving behind a cold, hollow void. Cradled against Alistair Montgomery's impenetrable chest, her heavy, exhausted body finally surrendered to the catastrophic physical trauma of the afternoon. A sharp, agonizing contraction ripped through her massive abdomen, a pain so blinding and absolute that it completely eclipsed the lingering burn of the bruises on her neck. "Alistair!" Clara gasped, her thick fingers digging frantically into the lapels of his ruined suit, her large, rounded face drained of all color, turning the shade of old parchment. Beneath her, a sudden warm rush of fluid soaked into the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. The amniotic sac had ruptured. The sheer pressure of the powerful half-vampire air pushing against her pelvis was like being crushed in a vice. Alistair's crimson eyes widened in a rare display of raw, unfiltered panic. He scooped Clara up, effortlessly bearing her immense swollen weight and bypassed the shattered doorway entirely. He moved through the sprawling penthouse with terrifying speed, carrying her toward the east wing, where a state-of-the-art private medical suite had been installed the moment he discovered she was alive. "Thomas," Alistair's voice boomed down the corridor, vibrating with absolute authority. "Get Dr. Jonathan Hayes here immediately. If he is not in this room in 3 minutes, I will flay his entire medical board alive." Alistair laid Clara down onto the crisp, sterile sheets of the medical bed. The room was blindingly white, packed with fetal monitors, oxygen tanks, and surgical equipment. He ripped the heavy, sweat-soaked cashmere robe away from her, leaving her in the oversized hospital gown Mrs. Whitman had laid out earlier. Clara writhed on the mattress, her broad, thick legs shifting restlessly as another monstrous contraction tore through her uterus. The child was coming, demanding its birthright with violent impatience. Moments later, the heavy doors flew open. Dr. Jonathan Hayes sprinted into the room, his tie askew, followed closely by a trusted mortal surgical assistant, Nurse Evelyn Ross. They took one look at Clara's massive, heaving form and immediately snapped into action. "Blood pressure is redlining 200/130, Nurse Ross shouted, slapping a heavy cuff onto Clara's thick, dimpled bicep. "She's tachycardic. The fetal heart rate is spiking. It's draining her reserves too fast. Push an IV of broad-spectrum coagulants and hang 2 bags of O-negative blood immediately." Dr. Hayes ordered, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. He positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his face grim. "Mr. Montgomery, you need to step back. The sheer kinetic energy of this birth is going to be volatile." "I am going nowhere," Alistair snarled, planting himself firmly at the head of the bed. He took Clara's plump, trembling hand in his icy grip, his thumb rubbing soothingly over her swollen knuckles. Clara threw her head back against the pillows, unleashing a guttural, tearing scream. Her heavy breasts heaved with the effort of dragging oxygen into her compressed lungs. The pain was beyond human comprehension. The child was drawing upon every ounce of her life force, cannibalizing the fat and muscle she had built up over the last 7 months to fuel its entrance into the world. "Clara, look at me," Alistair commanded, his voice suddenly dropping to a mesmerizing, hypnotic purr. His glowing red eyes locked onto her terrified, tear-filled gaze. "You are magnificent. You are the strongest creature I have ever known. Push for me, my queen. Bring our dynasty into the light." Empowered by his dark reassurance, Clara squeezed her eyes shut, bearing down with the entirety of her massive weight. The muscles in her thick waist and broad back locked in rigid agony. The monitors around them screamed a chaotic symphony of alarms, warning of imminent mortal heart failure. The overhead lights flickered wildly, reacting to the intense ancient magic radiating from the crowning child. "One more, Clara. The head is clear," Dr. Hayes yelled over the noise, his surgical gown soaked in sweat and amniotic fluid. With a final earth-shattering cry that tore her vocal cords, Clara pushed. The room plunged into sudden heavy silence, broken only by a sharp, piercing wail. It was not the weak, gurgling cry of a human infant, but the resonant, demanding roar of an apex predator. Boy," Dr. Hayes breathed, holding up the thrashing, blood-slicked infant. The child was unnaturally large, with a shock of thick, dark hair and eyes that already burned with a faint, iridescent crimson glow. Clara's heavy chest collapsed. A fleeting smile touched her plump lips as she heard her son's voice, but the edges of her vision were rapidly turning pitch black. The monumental effort, the blood loss, and the supernatural energy drain had finally broken her mortal vessel. The heart monitor flatlined, emitting a continuous shrill tone. "She's crashing cardiac arrest," Nurse Ross screamed, grabbing the defibrillator paddles. "Get away from her," Alistair roared. He shoved the medical cart aside with enough force to shatter it against the far wall. Alistair leaned over Clara's limp, heavy body. He did not hesitate. He brought his own wrist to his mouth and savagely tore open his own immortal flesh with his fangs. Dark, thick, shimmering blood welled to the surface. He pressed his bleeding wrist against Clara's pale lips, forcing the ancient life-giving ichor into her mouth. He massaged her thick throat, forcing her autonomic reflexes to swallow. Then Alistair lowered his face to the juncture of her heavy, soft neck. He sank his fangs deep into her jugular, not to take but to bind. The venom mixed with the blood, creating a massive, explosive catalyst within her failing mortal veins. Clara's back arched violently off the mattress. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with a brilliant, blinding ruby light. The transition was agonizing yet euphoric. Her heart, which had stopped beating mere moments ago, restarted with a thunderous, immortal rhythm. The stretch marks on her massive stomach, the thick flesh of her arms, and the heavy curves of her waist did not shrink or fade away. Instead, they were frozen in time, immortalized as permanent, sacred badges of a mother's ultimate sacrifice. Alistair lifted his head, his lips stained red. He looked down at the heavy, powerful, immortal queen he had created. He took the screaming infant from the trembling hands of Dr. Hayes and placed the boy gently onto Clara's broad, soft chest. Clara wrapped her thick arms around her newborn son, feeling the terrifying, beautiful strength coursing through her altered body. She looked up at Alistair, the monster she had tried to escape, and finally understood the depths of his dark devotion. She had destroyed her human life to protect her child, but in doing so, she had conquered the king of the underworld. She was no longer a terrified waitress. She was his eternal equal. What a breathtaking conclusion to a story of dark obsession, devastating betrayal, and the ultimate sacrifices of motherhood. Clara's journey from a terrified, exhausted waitress hiding in the shadows to the immortal, revered queen of the underworld proves that true power lies in fiercely protecting the ones we love. Her physical transformation became her greatest weapon and her eternal crown. If you were completely captivated by Clara's desperate fight for survival and Alistair's terrifyingly dark devotion, do not let the story end here. Please hit that like button, share this video with your fellow dark romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding tales.